Welcome to another Ronel Talks Money show. Today we are doing our second book review and we are going to talk about this book, The Ultimate Guide to Retirement in South Africa. Now, I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this and it is a very important and relevant topic. Now, just to tell you a little bit more about the book, The Ultimate Guide to Retirement in South Africa is co-authored by the award-winning editor Bruce Cameron and award-winning financial planner Wouter Fourie. Bruce Cameron is the now semi-retired. He is the founding editor of the independent newspaper Saturday Supplement Personal Finance and the quarterly Personal Finance magazine. Bruce is the winner of almost 50 journalism awards for his work on exposing unacceptable practices in the financial services industry. And we are so fortunate to have Bruce with us today to talk a little bit more about his book. Welcome, Bruce, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Ronel. Good to see you.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to remind the viewers, remember you please go and subscribe to the channel and also go and enter in the description field. There is a link for our monthly giveaway competition where you can also win one of these books, The Ultimate Guide to Retirement in South Africa. So thank you, Bruce, for sponsoring a book for our viewers.
Thank the publishers, they did the work.
True that. So, Bruce, I think let us get into it, but maybe taking a little step back and maybe just tell us a little bit more about why you chose to spend a career in personal finance.
Well, I didn't spend my entire career. I spent half my career doing politics. And then when P.W. Botha left, I thought that was a good time to leave as well. And I went across into financial journalism, something that had always interested me. And then it was like a sort of strange situation where I came in and the Irish bought out independent newspapers at that stage. And they started Business Report. They wanted me to edit that, but I turned that down and said, no, I'd rather start a personal finance section. So I worked for Business Report for 2 years. And then I started personal finance. They gave me 8 weeks to show it would work. Normally these things take about half an hour before they make a profit. But this showed a profit in the first 4 weeks. When I left, it was doing well. It's not doing so well now because the whole independent group seems to be collapsing on itself, unfortunately.
But The Ultimate Guide to Retirement, why did you write this book specifically?
Well, I started off many years ago writing a retirement book, and it came out in various editions. And then I brought out so I've written probably about 8 retirement books over 20 years. The trouble is that retirement has changed very, very rapidly. It's an enormous subject. The fact that this book is 278 pages long just shows you how big it is. You know, and most people look at their retirement funds and say, okay, I'm a member of a retirement fund, that's it. And they think nothing else about it. And yet it's so important, and you can't dismiss it in one sentence like that. And I think this is one of the main reasons why only about 6% of people retire financially secure. And I think after COVID, that's probably dropped to 4 or 5%. We still don't know how COVID's going to turn out, but I think it's going to be worse than a lot of people think. You know, they look at stock markets and they think stock markets are fine, but that's not what people are finding on an individual level. You know, if you take restaurants, for instance, where probably all of us know how many restaurants have closed down, many of them. And those people, there's so much collateral damage involved there, where people will lose their houses, they'll be without jobs, they won't be able to save for retirement. There's a huge number of problems coming our way. And that's why I say probably only 4 or 5% now will retire with sufficient money. But to come back to the book itself, I've kept updating it because of the changes. I mean, even on the Ultimate Guide, this is the second edition you're looking at. And on the first edition, you didn't have default annuities. Now you've got default annuities which have come from the government. So the changes take place. There have been enormous changes in the tax regime. And now provident funds are going to be phased out. So you won't be able to take a cash lump sum from provident funds. That comes in at the end of next month. So the changes are enormous with retirement annuities. And that's why you've actually got to keep writing and keep informing people about what's going on in retirement, or else they're going to be part of that 94, 95% who don't have enough money at retirement.
But in your book, you are specifically referring to retiring in South Africa. What would you say, what's the differentiating factors between people retiring in South Africa versus people retiring in the rest of the world?
Well, there'll be tax consequences. If you've worked in South Africa, you saved in South Africa, you've obviously got a huge problem with inflation rates here and inflation rates there, what you'll be able to buy as a pension offshore. If you're going to retire offshore, you're going to need a lot more money than you need to retire in South Africa. That's one thing I can tell you. So if you're part of that 95, 96%, think again. If you don't have lots of money, you're not going to be able to do it. And that means more money than in your retirement funds. You're going to have to have saved a lot more besides that. So it's not something I've concentrated on, because I just think it's going to be so few people who will actually be able to retire offshore. You've got to go in with capital. You've got to buy, with these agreements, you've got to spend so much money on buying a house or employing other people. So it's not something that, to me, that's worth concentrating on. I think if you've saved for retirement, you live in South Africa, you pretty well got to retire in South Africa.
Spent a whole chapter in your book about how much is enough. And I think that is a very valid question for a lot of people. How much is enough to save for retirement?
Well, there's no single amount to save. To me, the most important thing you've got to start doing is asking yourself how you want to live in retirement. So if you want to live in a big yacht or go overseas, it means you're going to require a hell of a lot of money. If you want to live here and travel every year, that's also going to cost you money. So you've got to work all those things out beforehand and take into account things like medical expenses. The inflation rate is far higher, so you're going to have to pay more for medical expenses as you retire. So you've got to budget all those things. And the best way to do it is to get a financial advisor to help you out. They're very difficult. You must disclose everything to the financial advisor, and they can help you get balance into what you need and what you don't need. Saving for retirement is a balance. It's between what you spend now as you're earning and deferring part of what you're saving now to spend in retirement. So you've got to get those two things right first. So you've not only got to budget for what happens on retirement day and for what happens afterwards, but you've got to budget now as well to make sure you get enough money in retirement.
We are customized to the traditional retirement products in terms of pension funds, provident funds, retirement annuities. But I think the question is asked more and more, are these traditional products still the way to go?
No, and if you take both main types, the traditional one where you go in, you buy a pension with a lump sum, and then you get a pension for the rest of your life. I don't think that was very suitable. I think the costs were too high, and you never really knew what those costs were. But living annuities, where over 90% of people in South Africa are living annuities, are just as dangerous. And it's a combination of the two, to me now, that is the solution. lot of people go into living annuities because they say, oh, they want to leave money to their heirs or the people, their children who come after them. But the problem is that with most of the people retiring with too little money, they're never going to leave money to their children. They're going to spend it before they die. If you retire with a living annuity and draw down, start off in your first month drawing down 7% of the returns, because you can draw down between 2.5% and 17.5%. But if you start at 7%, which is the average, by the way, of what people start at year 8, you'll hit that 17.5% under normal circumstances, which means you've reached the point of no return. From there, your pension will start reducing in both nominal terms and inflationary terms. So if you've got to draw down 7%, you're on a losing racket. You should be drawing down 4% or less in your first year of retirement. And that's good. That's a major problem for most people. And that comes back to your question, is how much is enough? So if you plan for retirement, you must work out exactly what you need to be spending and how long that pension is going to last. The trouble with most people, and you've seen the riots right around Europe, where people are being told, oh, you've got to retire later than you do now. Well, the first pension scheme came out in 1860, sponsored by Bismarck in Germany. You retired at 60, and the life expectancy if you retired at 60 was 62. Now, you still retire at 60 in Europe, but you die in South African terms, you're dying on average at 86. So it's crazy. You need to work longer, and they're going to be huge problems in Europe still because of when you retire. I was in Greece a couple of years ago, and people there retired 55. No wonder Greece is in trouble. So in in 10 years, you're going to more than double your retirement savings. So, retiring young is one thing that's out anyway for most people. Work as long as you can. I mean, I still work now. I don't actually need the money, but I just think that working is an important part of someone's lifestyle. It's just retirement to me it's a bit of a farce. Why should I have to retire because I reached 60 or 65? I had to retire at 65. There's nothing wrong with my brain, and particularly for those people who are short of money, you need to keep working, even if it's in a different job.
Bruce, then people are also start considering alternative options to basically substitute their retirement savings. And then I'm thinking about options like properties, businesses. What would you say, what are good alternative solutions to look at to substitute your retirement savings?
Well, the first thing I'd say is tax-free savings accounts. That's number one. Because for two reasons, not just for retirement, but as part of an emergency fund. And one thing COVID has shown us is the best thing is to save for a year, not 6 months as previously been put out. It's best to save, but for needs. I'm not talking about wants. Sit down, and any budget you do, you should take needs and wants. So needs is what you have to have. It's not buying ice creams or going to movies or going overseas. Those are all wants. So sit down, work out what your needs are for a year and aim at saving that. Now, the TFSA is very good. You get taxed on the money, but when you invest it, and you can invest 33,000 Rand a year up to a maximum of 500,000. You can use part of that as a retirement annuity. You can't, if you withdraw the capital, you're never going to get it back. You limit it to 500,000. So aim at always leaving that money there, but any growth on that, you can withdraw and use. So it makes it useful if you get retrenched because of something like COVID, you'll have that as an emergency fund, the growth on it. But if you don't need it and you leave it until retirement, you'll have a steady income from that. And it'll be significant because by the time you reach 500,000, that's going to be worth a lot more than 500,000, and it's going to complement your retirement. You can look at things like property. I know a number of people who use property, but you've got to be very careful with property, particularly if you're owning that property. You often get this rent to sell. I mean, I wouldn't like to be renting a property right now. You're not sure if a person's got a job or not. You could be sitting with somebody who doesn't pay the rent, and it becomes very difficult. You can also just look at property shares, but I mean, property has done very, very badly in South Africa recently. It's from its peak, it's dropped by about 50%. So, you've got a problem there. But if you do it wisely and you're very careful, you take into account that you might be without tenants, that rates can go up, all those sort of things. You must always look at the worst case scenario with property and plan accordingly. Don't look at the best case scenario, you're going to fall short. And then there are ordinary things like shares, particularly shares offshore. The South African stock market is very limited in what it's got to offer. You have whole sectors which are not properly represented on our stock exchange. So to me, I invest heavily offshore because Regulation 28, which governs retirement funds, doesn't govern, it doesn't cover pensions. And I invest through a living annuity. But when I invest offshore, I invest in a tracker fund, a passive fund offshore, in 3 of them, in fact. And the reason for it is the average person can't sit down and choose from about 50,000 funds which ones are going to pay off. Yes, there are some that do very well. There's one that's managed overseas by a guy by the name of Gerrit Smith, which does exceptionally well. But you've got to go in with lots of money. It's not for the ordinary person. But if you go into a tracker fund, you track the overseas market, you have access to all these different funds, and you're quite protected. I mean, because I had so much invested in tracker funds, I was very well protected right through COVID. And I still am, so, but I don't put everything on it. I still believe in the diversification of funds. But, those are the sort of things you've got to start looking at for investing offshore. So if you invest in a tracker fund, probably the best ones are the ones listed on the stock exchange, or else if you go to unit trust. I know Old Mutual, for instance, has got a very good offshore tracker fund, which with quite low costs. So you need to look at those things when you do invest offshore. Don't try and be fancy with things. Retirement's a long-term affair, and the longer you leave it, the better it's going to be. Share markets are more volatile than cash, but they give far better returns over the longer term.
Also on the healthcare, you've already mentioned that healthcare is becoming very expensive, and especially as you get older. But what tips can you give to people to keep healthcare costs down?
Well, the most important one to keep healthcare costs is not to claim. 60% of people on average people who retire claim 60% of their healthcare in retirement. And that includes people who live for short periods of time. And healthcare becomes more expensive when you get older because you get all these ailments as you get older. Even if you get something like dementia, that takes a lot of money. So the best thing is to try and stay healthy. Now, I'm a member of Discovery, and I've got lots of complaints about Discovery, but the one big thing about Discovery is that it encourages you to remain healthy. You get rewarded every day. I don't view a member of Discovery or not, but on the rewards points, I'm already on almost 40,000 points on gold level. And it's 1.5 months into the new year. The reason is I hike every day. I hike for at least an hour on average. And I eat healthy. I've got one daughter-in-law who's a vegetarian and a son-in-law who's a vegan. The vegan eats 10 fruits and vegetables a day, and he eats very healthily. And as a result of their influence, I've cut down a lot. I love fish, but I mean, meat I'm almost off altogether. And fish I'll probably only eat 2 or 3 times a week. And I went for the discovery checkup the other day. All my signs are good. My diabetes, I'm below normal. Cholesterol, I'm below normal. My heart rate is normal. And I'm incredibly fit, and I feel better for it. I can tie my own shoelaces. By the way, I turned 73 on Sunday, so that gives you an idea of my age. And you know, it just makes such a difference. And when I go away, for instance, I've done a large part of the hike in Spain, the one across northern Spain. I was in Tigray last year, just before the thing broke out and before that civil war developed, which is very, very sad to me, because I was in Tigray for most of the time, climbing up to monasteries and hiking. You have all those sort of opportunities if you remain fit in retirement. So that's the best way to keep down your costs. The problem is that a lot of people are just reducing the level at which they live, at which they claim. So they might have been incomprehensive, but because their income's falling, they reduce the level until they've only got a hospital plan left, and that's not good enough when you're in old age. So stay fit and eat healthy.
I truly believe that with healthcare, you need to be proactive and you need to be preventative, because that will definitely help you to save on those costs. So, Bruce, happy birthday. I hope you have enjoyed your birthday. But then you've also spent a chapter in your book talking about behavior in terms of finance and personality types. Now, that to me is very interesting, because I've also spent a chapter in my book talking about that. But maybe you can just elaborate, how does that impact in terms of your behavior and your personality type on your retirement planning?
Well, I would say yes, it does. But I think the problem is that people confuse things. They muddle gambling with investment. And if you're a gambler, which I'm not, but I mean, I see these warnings all the time saying, be careful, it could be a very bad habit. And I know from one case I know of, it can be a very bad habit. But gambling doesn't stop at a casino. Take Bitcoins. That's a gamble. It's not an investment. You could lose or gain huge amounts of money when you see how it bounces around. It's the same much with gold as well. I mean, you know, the biggest con on gold is you get these companies that go out and sell these coins and say, medallions, sorry, they're not coins, they're medallions. So that you buy it and then you try and sell it back. It's a 40% discount, you know, and people don't seem to realize. You know, phone one day and one of these gold coin dealers and ask him how much of these collections are, and then phone them back the next day and tell them you're selling and see what the difference in price is. You know, and people fall for that sort of thing all the time. So when it comes to that sort of thing, I think the more you gamble, the more you should ask for financial advice, because it's one thing that increasingly financial advisors are trained to deal with, to keep you on the straight and narrow, to make you realize that saving for retirement is a long-term scheme. And if you're conservative, much as I'm very conservative in the way I invest, but in the long term, it'll pay off. But don't draw it along the way. Don't withdraw your retirement savings. That's probably the biggest single cause why people don't retire with enough money. And just stick with it and you will be okay.
We know that women on average, they live much longer than men, but they tend to have less retirement savings than men. Now, you have also contributed a chapter in your book talking about women and retirement. So maybe you can just give us some advice. What will you tell women that can help them with their retirement planning?
First of all, a small joke. Why do men live for shorter lives? Because they want to.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons for this. I mean, the one thing why women receive a lower pension is because they live longer. So they'll get the same amount of money, but spread over a longer the ceiling that gets at retirement. There are a lot of reasons for this. One, women get married and have children, and they don't contribute to retirement that period. There is a glass ceiling. There are people that earn the same as men, but there are a lot of people who don't. I mean, the number of times I've seen in financial institutions where women have been promoted because they're women, and then they earn less as well. And there's a lot of that goes on, and it's so downright unfair that goes on. And I mean, I've got two twin daughters, and I see how they earn, and they're self-employed basically, but they earn well. But not all women are like that. And you've got to encourage them. I mean, I tell my daughters, this is what you must do with retirement savings every year. Calculate it and do things properly. And if you're not working, if you stop to have a baby or something, you should insist that your husband or partner contributes to your retirement savings, so it builds up and that you've actually got it. And then the other big thing that I find with women is they'll go and have a baby, pull their money out, lend it to their husbands who want to start a business, which then goes bankrupt, and then they've got no retirement savings. Never withdraw money and give it to somebody else. Keep it for your retirement, or else you're going to land up eating dog food. I mean, it's as simple as that. Or we could say cat food in the case of Mr. Katz, who did all the retirement planning stuff.
I think that's very good advice, and definitely things that women should take into account, especially with these days where we have more women single-handedly having to take care of the family. So they need to really educate themselves about retirement and how they can look after themselves during that period. But Bruce, then also I think something else that quite often people get a nasty surprise is when they get to retirement and then they realize the tax impact on their retirement savings. Maybe you can also just talk to us about the key tax implications.
Yeah, recently there was a commentator who said that you should invest your money offshore and not, sorry, I'm just going to call something up on another computer so I can just quote the actual figures. That you should invest offshore because Regulation 28 doesn't apply. Now, Regulation 28 is part of the Retirement Funds Act. And it says it limits the amount you can invest anywhere, like you can only invest 75% in shares. And he said, forget about retirement funds, just invest offshore. Well, that's a load of rubbish because the tax attractions are so enormous. And I'd just like to run through some of them. When you contribute, if you contribute 27.5% or 350,000 a year, that's the caps off it. You can't contribute more. You can, but you might be taxed in the next year if you die. And you can deduct that from your retirement earnings. And that's a lot of money to come off that you're not going to be paying tax on. So if you're on, say, a 40% tax return, that's 40% you're saving on your investment. Then you invest that money, and along the way, you're not paying any tax on the earnings. You're not paying capital gains tax. You're not paying income tax on the returns, and you don't pay the 20% withholding tax on dividends, which is significant as you go along. Then at retirement, the first 500,000 you withdraw is tax-free. Now, if you withdraw before retirement, you don't get that tax-free amount. You get a nasty tax surprise if you withdraw your money before you retire. Not worth doing. Then on the next amount, the next 200,000 after that 500,000, you only get taxed at 18%. Then the next 350,000, you get taxed at 27%. And then anything over 1 million, just over 1 million, you get taxed at 36%. Now that's high. So the best thing, in fact, to me is not to withdraw money at retirement. Draw the 18%, yes, because it's tax-free, and just you need a financial advisor to work out. In some cases, the 18% is likely to could be to your advantage. So you need to get that balance right. But anything over 27% is too high. The other thing is that when you retire, and now that all money is going to have to pay a pension, the tax gets taken off the remaining amount as you earn that money. So if you're earning, say, 20,000 Rand a month, you get taxed at 20,000 at your marginal rate on that 20,000 Rand. So the rest of your money is still sitting tax-free on its earnings in your retirement savings. So you get 3 points of major savings along the way. And then what happens when you look at it, you land up, and with your if you earn 250,000 Rand a year, and you take the full 1/3 retirement, that would be, you'd get, and this is on saving about 10% a year, you'd get on your returns, you take just over 1 million Rand in your pension, and you get a 97,000 commutation. But if you did it the way that was suggested, you'd only get, if you took the 1/3 and then retirement, so from the 1 million, you drop down to 726,000. From the monthly pension, you drop down to 72,000. You know, it's crazy not to take advantage of retirement annuities. And if you go, again, I come back, if you go to a responsible financial advisor, they will show you these figures and prove it to you. When I heard that, I actually went to Alexander Forbes and I said, it just didn't make sense to me. And they sat down and actually did the figures for me and worked it out to make sure that I was correct. So use them. The tax penalties are mild and far less than you would pay if you just put it into a unit trust without the retirement unit.
I also just want to emphasize again to the viewers, remember, this is not financial advice or tax advice. Every one of you have a different situation. So please talk to your financial advisor, your tax consultant, and make sure that you get the advice that is appropriate to what is happening to your circumstances. But Bruce, then you've also co-authored this very interesting book, Secure Your Retirement. And then you also talk a little bit about COVID-19. You are talking about the low interest rates and what's the impact of that on retirement?
Well, it's significant because it means people will get less in retirement. But COVID and the kleptocracy of Zuma's government and the theft of public money is going to have an enormous impact on all of us because of returns. And we're going to find that returns are going to be difficult. You're not going to get high interest rates. We'll get higher here than America because here we're so broke. We've got to offer bonds at higher rates to get a return on that. But inflation is also higher as well. So, you know, even though inflation has come down, it's a problem. But it's people without jobs And that's where the big problem is going to be. I referred to it earlier, just in restaurants. But across the board, there are people who've lost jobs. There enormous number of people have lost jobs. And it's going to affect people. And that's why the savings is so important, and it's the reason why you must save more for retirement. Now, some people work on this asset liability right from the like COVID. Then you might have to increase how much you contribute to retirement over the years if you're going to meet your liabilities in retirement. Sounds very complex, but it again takes a good financial advisor to help you balance these things out. But it again shows just how important trustees will sort it out, and then leave it, and you'll retire at retirement age with enough money. You probably won't have enough money, particularly if the contributions are low. So if you're only contributing 10%, say, from your employer and yourself, that's not going to be enough money. You need to be somewhere around 15% if you really want to retire well. Then aim at 20%. Of your after-tax earnings. So it takes time, and you need to plan for gaps. You need, as I say, the book is 278 pages long. It doesn't cover everything, and it's not financial advice. And I like your point about everyone is different. So when you take advice, it needs to be your advice. You've got different living standards, you've got different incomes. There are so many things that differ between people. The worst thing I ever hear is people say, oh, they went to the hairdresser and the hairdresser said, this is what so-and-so told me. That's the worst advice anybody could ever take, because nobody is the same.
Bruce, then there's also the impact of inflation, and especially during times when investments are not performing well. So what can you tell us? How can people beat inflation as well?
Well, first of all, it's patience. You know, again, let's go back to the investment advisor. If you've got a good financial advisor who isn't trying to talk you into investing in nonsense like property syndications and all those sort of things, which was probably the biggest scam I've ever come across, was property syndications, where they ripped off elderly people. But you need to take it very slowly and very carefully to be able to achieve what you want to set out to achieve. Sorry, just repeat the question to me.
Just in terms of inflation, how can you beat inflation?
Yeah. So be patient, because you might not perform in line with inflation in 1 year, but the next year you will. Because most investments historically have always, not cash, but shares and bonds, but particularly shares and property, have outperformed inflation over the years. So you will always beat inflation in the long term. The thing is just to save every year and the same amount and stick to that advice that you received from your financial advisor.
You have touched now on scams, and I think there's so many scams going on currently during this lockdown period. But you hear of that often, that people, when they reach retirement age, that they deal with somebody who promised them the world, and the next minute that person is just disappear with their money. What advice can you give to people how to avoid scams?
Well, one, check your bank account. That's number one. I wrote about banks last week and the way they refuse to interact with customers. They always send out no reply emails when they advise you. You can never get hold of them. It's about time that the banks woke up and started treating customers fairly. You know, they're new to the marketing sector, and they need to jump up and do something that's actually worthwhile. But apart from that, you know, the reason why banks are part of the scheme is because they allow these debit orders, and they don't check the debit orders properly, and they should check them on a monthly basis, because they put a debit order through one month, and then the next month it gets altered onto a different month. So if you've cancelled it once, it then comes through as a different amount and they're still allowed through. And they just continue to do this because they're making money from it. So it's about time the banks really started doing things about it. But other things just on scams. If you get approached by somebody you've never heard of before, don't reply. Just say, no, thank you, goodbye. The same applies to emails. If you don't recognize that email, just don't even read it, just blot it out. And the trouble with COVID is that there's been a huge takeoff in electronic stuff. And I mean, I get emails from the strangest people in the world. I even got one from a couple of prostitutes on Facebook. I suddenly thought, well, what the hell's going on here? When someone kept saying, hi, 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 and I went and looked and I could see quite obviously she was a prostitute. How she got my number, God alone knows. But those are the sort of things that are going on. You get scammed in many different ways. If you take the Bitcoin thing, this organization that was selling shares in it, it's an old scam that they came up with. They sold you stuff they didn't have, you know, and you had all sorts of scams like that. And most of those come from people that you've never heard of, who approach you. You just shouldn't do it. Then go again to your financial advisor and say to your financial advisor, what do you think of the scheme? And in most cases, the financial advisor will either go and find out and check. And the other thing is, if you look at the Financial Sector Advisory Authority, Conduct Authority, you'll find that every day they put out warnings, literally on a daily basis, that people aren't registered. So if you're dealing with somebody who's not registered as a financial advisor, and you go onto the FSCA website, you can look it up quite quickly. You can tell very quickly if someone's registered or not. You can even see what they're registered for. So always check to see that the person you're dealing with is registered. If you do that, your chances of falling for a scam retreat enormously. And the chance, you've got very little chance of being ripped off if you follow those sort of rules. But again, I say never react to people who you haven't approached.
I always say to people, when it comes to money, you trust nobody. You really go and do the checks yourself, because at the end of the day, nobody will ever take better care of your financial well-being than yourself. So make sure that you do the checks and that you educate yourself. But Bruce, then there's also, it happens a lot that people will get close to retirement age and then only they realize that they don't have sufficient savings. So what would you tell people in that scenario? What can they do? Because we know time value of money is so important when it comes to building up a retirement portfolio. But if people didn't do that, what is left for them that can still help them?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, go back and read the books again, yours and mine, whatever, because that's going to help, because you'll start planning earlier. But if you've got to that stage where you're reaching at retirement, you can see you haven't got enough money. The first thing to do is to consider working longer, if you can work longer, if you're not forced to retire. And if you can't work in that job, you can try and get a consultancy job or something similar outside. But don't take big risks like going out and buying a hardware store where the books are false and they've got two sets of figures and all those sort of things that happen. And then that goes bankrupt immediately because the so-called non-registered books are actually just a scam from the beginning. And they would, if it was a decent business, they wouldn't be selling it. So, you know, be careful of those sort of things when you go out and get a second job. And also, don't be scared to come down a couple of notches. You know, that if you say a foreman of something or in charge of a section, don't be scared to say, okay, well, I'll earn less, but I need it. I mean, because your chances of finding employment actually reduce as you get older, in most cases. Other people are lucky and they can continue. Like I've been lucky and I've been able to continue working. I write columns, I write books, I'm a retirement fund trustee. So I've got a lot of things on my plate. I actually have to say no to a lot of things. But continue to work. But the important thing is to budget. Start, as soon as you realize that you're short of money, start budgeting immediately and go back to that needs and wants argument. Look at every single thing you do. You know, I was in a queue in one of the retail stores recently, and a guy was buying Coke and chips, about 6 bottles of Coke and about 12 bottles of 12 packets of chips, and he put it on the budget section of his credit card. I almost tapped him on the shoulder and said, "You are being absolutely mad to buy that sort of thing on the budget section of a credit card. If you use the budget section of a credit card, first of all, you're spending too much. You should never try and use that budget section, particularly if you're not paying it off immediately. So budget and get your needs and wants correct. Even with what you found if you've got a want, you might be able to do something cheaper like transport. You know, I worked out recently that most people waste a hell of a lot of money on buying cars. You might be better off just taking Google rather than buying a car. I mean, I've just done my tax now because I do provisional tax I had to pay in at the end of this month. And I'm hardly using my car because of COVID. And the expenses of that car are just enormous. You know, when you take into things like depreciation and all those things. And that I've seriously got to the stage now where I'm just thinking of settling it. The only thing that worries me is that the Uber drivers are just so bad. A lot of them are. And I just think they drive like suicide drivers. They're worse than ordinary taxis, in my view. That's the only thing that keeps me away from them.
The last question. You have obviously written this book now, and it is so comprehensive, and there's a lot of good tips and advice. But what would you say? What is the one thing that you would like readers of this book to take away?
To save from your first salary check and keep saving until you retire and never draw a cent of that money while you're on the way. And then you'll be part of that 4, 5, 6%, and the figure will swell.
Excellent advice, and you've said it in such a summarized good way for everybody to understand and apply. So I want to thank you so much for spending time with us, telling us more about your book. You have such a big amount of wisdom when it comes to personal financial knowledge. So thank you for sharing that with us. And then I am going to share the link where you can buy Bruce's book as well, The Ultimate Guide to Retirement in South Africa. And then also remember, you can win one of his books as well. So please go and enter the competition in the link in the description field. But I think Bruce still wants to say something.
This is an excellent book you wrote. When you sent it to me, I was really impressed. It's written simply and will get through to people. I mean, this is much wider than retirement, but it's an excellent book and people should read this as well.
Thank you, Bruce. I really appreciate that testimonial, and it's really awesome and special coming from a person like yourself with so much knowledge, and you've spent so much time in the personal financial space. So thank you. I really appreciate that. But then back to the viewers, I hope you have enjoyed this talk. I hope you have learned a lot. It is really such an important topic. And yes, please get one of Bruce's books, read it, and make sure that you educate yourself about retirement so that you can be one of those 4% or 6% who can retire with sufficient savings. So I will see you then next time. Thank you and goodbye.